All right, good morning, everybody. I am honored to have the opportunity to help essentially celebrate Sex Assault Awareness Month. This is a huge problem in our community. And it's going to take getting the word out, it's going to take talking about it, what may be an uncomfortable subject at times. But to give you an idea, it is in schools, it's at the workplace, it's in the home. And to give you an idea of the scope, in the last full year before COVID, this office got 135 convictions for sex assault. This is everywhere. And while it may be a little uncomfortable for people to hear, I think there's a misconception out there that it's a stranger jumping out of the bushes that is causing most sex assaults. That is not true. And in 80% of the cases, the victim knows the perpetrator. And so no offense, but that's mother's boyfriend, that's uncle, that's grandpa. So families can really protect their kids. They can protect their keiki by watching who their kids are spending time with. This includes sleepovers that they go to. It includes other kids coming into the house, who's watching the kid, who's being the babysitter. Because 1 out of 3 women are going to be victims of sex assault at some point, and 1 out of 8 males. So this is really a society-wide problem that is always there. The more we speak out about it, the more we make it safe to talk about, for people to report it, the better off we're all going to be. And the partnership between all of the players is important. The police, the treatment folks, it's working with the Sex Assault Treatment Center and the Honolulu Prosecutor's Office. It's trying to get as seamless as possible approach to this so people can feel safe in reporting it. SATC is set up so it's a place where victims can go to talk about what had happened to them in a safe, protected environment. And I can't speak well enough about the cooperation between our office and the Sex Assault Treatment Center to do that. Now, of course, it's always going to be the victim's prerogative whether to report the crime to begin with or whether to follow through with prosecution. We just want to work with SATC and the other partners to make this as safe and as secure a place so they can make that decision responsibly and feel comfortable about it. So I'm honored to be here today with Rochelle Vadina, who's head of our sex assault unit, and with Cindy Shimomi Saito, who's head of the Sex Assault Treatment Center. So at this point, let me turn it over to Rochelle.
Sex assault is a unique crime, and like Prosecutor Alm just said, the victims of sex assault are often victimized by those that they know and those that they trust. And in that sense, as much as sex assault is a unique crime, the harm suffered by sex assault victims is also unique. In addition to any physical harm that may be caused these victims also experience feelings of betrayal. They are betrayed by those they trust the most. They experience guilt. They are often blamed for the offenses. Sex assault is probably the only crime where a victim is scrutinized by the clothes that she chose to wear a day that she goes for a jog or a night out. So in that sense, victims are often blamed and they're put in a position where they feel that they have to defend themselves. Because sex assaults are committed by known perpetrators, often people within the child's home if it's a child case, or people in relationships with adult victims, there is that additional, layer of difficulty that comes for the victims to report. They are often reluctant to report because they don't want to ruin a certain bond. Child victims are often left feeling like they destroyed the family. although they were victimized by someone in the home. If a sex assault is reported, our office is prepared and dedicated to prosecuting these cases. We have a sex assault team comprised of specially trained prosecutors who are trained to handle cases in a victim-centered, trauma-informed way. While we seek to achieve justice for the victims and to hold defendants or suspects accountable, we also want to ensure that the way these cases are handled is in a way that doesn't re-traumatize the victims. So the prosecutors on our team are trained to deal with victims in a way to understand all of the trauma that the victims have gone through prior to even coming to our office. We have prosecutors on call 7 days a week, ready to respond to reports of sexual assault in our community. However, before a case even comes to our office, there is a team already in place working. There's a team in our community already working together to ensure that victims are safe, to ensure that victims are receiving medical care that they need, and to ensure that victims are also receiving the emotional care that is critical when you're dealing with victims of sexual assault. And this team in our community includes the Honolulu Police Department, who do the investigations. This team and partnership in our community also includes the Children's Justice Center, where children are interviewed in a comfortable, safe environment. This team includes child welfare services, who ensure that the child victims are in a safe place. And this team also includes a sex abuse treatment center. And the sex abuse treatment center provides critical care to these victims. Again, most often, victims are very reluctant to report these crimes because of the special dynamics that come with these crimes. The Sex Abuse Treatment Center, they don't only deal with the victim and deal with the sex assault after it's been reported or brought to the Sex Abuse Treatment Center. Their work starts before that, because the Sex Abuse Treatment Center works hard to get the message out to the community, to provide community awareness and education, so that if there are victims in our community who are reluctant to share, sometimes just hearing that message from the Sex Abuse Treatment Center might give that victim that sense of empowerment. There is someone that I can report this to. There is a safe place for me. And that is critical, because if victims are not reporting, then these crimes are going unchecked in our community and no one will be held accountable. In addition to community awareness and education, the Sex Abuse Treatment Center are oftentimes the first interaction that sex assault victims have with any type of program in our state. And when a victim goes to the Sex Abuse Treatment Center, they are met with compassion, and they receive comprehensive care. They receive crisis counseling if they had recently been victimized, and the Sex Abuse Treatment Center helps them to get to a place where they feel safe again, where they're able to talk about the things that happened to them. They receive ongoing therapy and counseling if that's required for the victim. And what's also important about that, as far as the way it impacts our office, is if we do receive a case for prosecution, the Sex Abuse Treatment Center is still providing the support that victims often need to understand the system and to feel empowered to continue going forward with the process, which is often very difficult. And the Sex Abuse Treatment Center is critical in terms of collecting medical evidence, providing medical treatment and collecting evidence from these victims soon after the crime is committed. So there is an ongoing partnership and working relationship between numerous programs or partners in our community that all come together to ensure that victims of sexual assault are treated with respect, are treated with compassion. And that's, by doing that, again, we're encouraging disclosure, we're encouraging reporting, and we're encouraging victims to testify at trial, which ultimately can make our community a safer place because we can then hold people accountable. And with that, I'm pleased and honored to now introduce Cindy Shimomi Saito, Executive Director of the Sex Abuse Treatment Center.
Wow, Rochelle did such a great job. I feel like I don't have to say very much. All kidding aside, you know, like both were saying, sex assault happens a lot more frequent than anyone knows. And because it's such a personal crime, it's so hard for victims to come forward and to disclose. We anticipate that as our state opens up, we're going to see an increase in the numbers of sex assault cases involving both children and adults. And because of that, partnerships like what we have here becomes even that much more critical. At SATC, our focus is really the well-being of the survivor, of our client. And, you know, from our perspective, what really impacts that, one of the things that majorly impacts it, is the specialized sex assault team that Rochelle was just talking about. The impact of sex assault is so complex. It impacts what people say, how they respond, how they remember, how they disclose the details of what happened to them. And a lot of people don't get it because oftentimes these behaviors or reactions seem counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense to the average person. But because of the special treatment, the specialized training that Rochelle and her team members have, they get it. You know, they fully understand the impact of trauma, and this impacts how they interface with our clients, with survivors. They're able to meet them where they're at, and they're able to just take in all of the information about what happened to the person in the way the person needs to report it. This makes it so much easier for our clients. Likewise, they have this, they really have structured things where the person or the prosecutor who initially hears of this case is able to have the case throughout the entire process, vertical prosecution. This, again, is really impactful for our clients' well-being because it prevents the need to have to repeat themselves, the narrative of what took place over and over again. And in doing so, there's re-victimization that can happen when a person, especially a child, needs to keep going back to the details of what happened. A lot of people come to the Sex Abuse Treatment Center for medical care. And when they do, if they haven't reported to the police already, we talk with them about their reporting options and we work through that with them. Whether they decide to report it or not, our physicians will collect evidence, and this becomes a part of the criminal investigations by the police down the road as well as prosecution. Our medical legal services are 24/7. And this is important because you have to collect evidence within 120 hours of the assault. We're just very fortunate to have legislators currently who understand the importance of this and who are working hard to ensure that these services are funded around the clock. I think the bottom line in all of this is that, the prosecutor's office, the Sex Abuse Treatment Center, our goals, our agendas, they're very different. But, the prosecutors, for example, they are focused and working hard on holding offenders accountable, on making sure that they can preserve public safety. But while they're doing this, they never do lose sight of the safety and the well-being of survivors, of our clients. And that's really, really important to those of us who, that's our focus, right? So together, this partnership is one piece of that whole system of care that both Prosecutor Alm and Rochelle was referring to. All of us, the police, the Children's Welfare Services, and the Children's Justice Center, all of us partner together to really provide that kind of support because it is such a difficult crime, such a difficult situation to come forward. So with the partnership, we feel we're able to provide that kind of safe environment that's needed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And my parting words are two things. One, I think people need to be flexible and be open to understanding the dynamics of sex assault. So don't think just because somebody is in a wheelchair or impotent or you don't see them as a sexual threat. Part of this is about power, control, getting away with things like this. And so where somebody may not seem obvious as a likely perpetrator, they may be in fact the ones doing it. And second, we need the public's help. You can see the professionals we have working on this, but we need the public's and the family's support to support the victims. When people bring this up, listening to them, whether a case gets taken or not later on is a separate issue, but supporting them, encouraging them to report it so all options are kept open. So this is a statewide problem, it's a national problem, it's a world problem. We're trying to work together to be as effective in this area as we can. We'd be happy to take a few questions if anyone had any.
In
Yeah.
regards to the state opening back up, how concerned is the prosecutor's office with a possible surge in cases?
Well, we are very concerned because whether it's child abuse, whether it's sex assault, when kids are at home and staying at home, it's harder for that to get reported. And so once they are back in school full time, once they're seen by other people, often who have a duty to report, these numbers are going to go up, there's no question. We just want to make sure people know there are resources available. The Sex Assault Treatment Center is often the first contact. We are expecting it. Rochelle and her team are getting ready for it. They're working with the Sex Assault Treatment Center, but we are convinced, as in many things, in many areas of crime, it's going to go up again.
You know, if there is a call to 911, my mom's boyfriend is doing something. At that point, what happens to the person who called in terms of, are they removed from the home? Is the accuser removed, or what happens? What can the public expect when the phone call goes through?
That's a good question. When a report is made to 911 of a sexual assault, the first thing that the investigator does is determine when the last sex assault occurred. In the situation that you just asked about, where it was someone in the home that sexually assaulted a child, oftentimes children delay disclosure of their sexual abuse for months, even for years. So the first thing that the investigator does is determine when was the last time that the sex assault occurred. Then they would also determine, the next thing they're thinking about is safety of the child. Is that person still living in the home? Is the perpetrator or the suspect still living in the home with the child? If so, and they view that there is an issue regarding child safety, then I believe that's when more of our partners come into play, because CWS is informed, Child and Welfare Services is informed. What they do as well is they look at the other parent. So, for example, if it's mom's boyfriend, who committed the offense, then they look to mom. Is mom supportive of the child? Is mom gonna kick this guy out of the house and protect her child? If so, then the investigators, they still take the report very seriously, but it's a different level than them knowing that the mom does not support, the child is still in the home. At that case, in that situation, there's a chance that CWS would probably have to intervene for for the child's safety and remove the child from the home. And again, that is why this crime is something that's so different. Here we have many times it's a situation where a child is victimized in the child's home, and if that child's parent is not supportive, which is something that's very important that we need, then the child is now, again, traumatized even more by being removed from the home. And that child then just feels basically discarded, unimportant. They feel like, why am I being removed? I didn't do anything wrong. And that's why these cases really result in so much more emotional and I guess emotional harm, I think, a lot of times. The emotional scars are lasting well beyond any physical injuries or physical scars.
But how long would that take from the time the first investigator comes, interviews the child, the parent, and it sounds like he may need to call other offices in for the help. Is it going to be a few days, a few weeks before anything conclusive can happen, or is it going to happen that day so the child can be moved or no?
Oh, CWS responds immediately as well. Yes, if there's a report and it's determined that the child is still at home and that the suspect is still in the home and that the mother is not supportive, then HPD works closely with Child and Welfare Services to ensure that the child is in a safe place.
Remind me your name?
Cindy.
Sydney. In regards to, for the viewers out there who are watching this, the reliability of the system and the treatment center, in terms of the safe space provided, have there been any reports of people, once they're in there, getting abused
Once they're
in the centers themselves? Or is it a pretty reliable system, in your opinion?
once they're in the system, does abuse happen? Is that what your question is? Anything is possible. I mean, I think what you're saying is if CWS is involved, could abuse still happen? Is that the question?
In the treatment centers?
Oh, in the treatment, no, abuse wouldn't happen in the treatment centers. We're not a residential place. What we do is we come in, in that scenario that you were just talking about with that child, so much of what that child is going to be going through, it's not just the sex abuse, it's all the aftermath that sometimes is even worse to the child, right? They feel like they're the ones that have broken the family up, or if the perpetrator was the breadwinner of the family, there's some great financial impact. So the system comes together in different ways. We all have different roles. Ours would be to really help the child to understand where responsibility lies, that it might be worse before it gets better, but that what happened to them was something that happened to them, not because of them. That's really important because self-blame plays a big role, right?
So, are there any cases where maybe a child is brought and gets services and kind of, unfortunately, gets back into that sexual abuse cycle?
I think you're talking more about child welfare services, and I wish they were here to help bring light to that. They have a very, very tough job. They're in there needing to assess very quickly the safety with all different kinds of influences coming to them, right? They need to find a safe place for the child if indeed the home doesn't remain safe, whether it's foster care or looking at other people that's affiliated with the family. So if you're asking specifically, does the CPS, Child Welfare Services, do they get involved and then we hear about another kind of situation? I can't really answer that. They're the ones that are going to have to respond to that. All I know is that it's a very, very difficult job that they have, that they're needing to assess, all elements all at the same time. So it's wonderful that we all can come in together and support that whole process.
One last question. What about on the other hand, where if someone calls 911 and says so and so assaulted me, and what if those accusations are false? So how is that handled by anybody? Or you find out later, or does it happen?
This office's job is to work with all the partners, whether it's HPD, SATC, to investigate cases. So there's, and we have to be able to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. So there are going to be situations where we look at it, we suspect something happened, we don't think we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. We're not going to indict that case, we're not going to go forward with prosecution. It's true in sex assault, it's true in domestic violence, it's true in theft, rape, robbery, everything. Our responsibility is to be an ethical prosecutor. You don't charge somebody and you don't proceed with the prosecution unless you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's an unknown when each one starts, where it's going to go. We want to just make the system as safe and amenable as possible, so the victim reports it once, does the thorough exam, gets a good interview, so they're not repeatedly asked questions to new people. It's why it's one of those vertical prosecution teams in the office that a deputy prosecutor is assigned to the case at the beginning and handles the case all the way through, so the case isn't passed on from one person to another. So we will look at it carefully. Some cases will go ahead, some will not. You heard my number, 135 convictions for sex assault. This is a big problem. This is a big issue. But we will carry on, and Rochelle and her team are getting as much training as possible. But you got to have the right attitude as a deputy prosecutor to work on these kind of cases. It's extremely difficult. It's hard for the victims. It's hard to get up there. They may not have to testify, but they have to be willing to. But to get into court and testify, I know from my years as a judge that those were really tough cases for the victims. You'd see them on the stand going up against the wall right here, so they don't have to look at the perpetrator until the prosecutor asks if identification is possible, and then they look quickly, make identification, and the case goes on. These are extremely difficult cases. That said, as a judge, I took them extremely seriously, and if people were convicted of sex assault, the weight of the law came down on it, because it often dealt with sex assault and then threats to keep the victim quiet. So we take these cases very seriously, but we will look at it on a case-by-case basis as to whether we can proceed with charging and with going to trial.
Can I add to that?
Please.
I think what's important to think about is when a person comes forward to report, there's a series of things that needs to happen, and none of it is fun. You come to the Sex Abuse Treatment Center, and although we have wonderful doctors and crisis counselors who are going to provide good care, it's still a sex assault examination, and that's not a fun thing to have to experience. You're thrown into a very foreign arena of the court system, of police investigations or interviews and prosecutorial questions. None of that is fun for a survivor. So when you ask, what's the likelihood of somebody lying or false reporting? Very, very small, very small. What we may see more often is a child who recants, who after, if there's lack of support, or if family members or other people who are untrained start to really try to interrogate the child, soon the child says, forget this, I'm done. You know what, it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean it didn't happen, it means that the child is tired of just that trauma and stress, the re-triggering that happens. So I think that's really more common than any kind of intentional lying.
Okay, thank you all for coming.